At 10:47 a.m. on April 24, 1944, Staff Sergeant Joseph Rex stood at the right waist gun position of a B-17 Flying Fortress 6 miles above Friedrichshafen, Germany, when the entire tail section of his aircraft exploded in a shower of aluminum and fire. The concussion knocked him backward into the radio room bulkhead. His ears rang, smoke filled the fuselage. Through the haze, he could see daylight where there shouldn't be daylight. The tail was there, sort of, hanging at an angle that made his stomach drop. The intercom crackled. "Tail gunner, report." Silence. "Ramirez, you there?" Nothing. The B-17 shuddered. The controls must have been barely functioning. They were 280 miles from England, surrounded by German fighters, flying an airplane that by every law of physics and engineering should have torn itself apart in the next 60 seconds. Joe grabbed the support strap. His hands were shaking. What he didn't know was that 20 minutes from now, he'd look through his gun sight and see something that would haunt German fighter pilots for the rest of the war. Joseph Rex was 22 years old, a coal miner's son from Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Before the war, he'd worked in the same mine as his father and 3 uncles. 8 hours a day, 600 feet underground, swinging a pick in darkness that made night seem bright. He'd enlisted 2 days after Pearl Harbor. "Figured if I was going to die in the dark, might as well do it fighting," he told the recruiter. The Army Air Forces trained him as a gunner. They said he had good eyes, quick reflexes, the kind of steady hands you develop when your livelihood depends on not making mistakes with dynamite. By April 1944, Joe had flown 17 missions with the 379th Bomb Group out of Kimbolton, England. His crew flew a B-17G they'd named Lucky Lass, though luck seemed like the wrong word for what they'd experienced. 0 kills. S=. 17 missions, countless hours staring through a gun sight at empty sky or distant specks that turned into deadly Me-109s before Joe could get a good burst off. He'd fired thousands of rounds. Hit exactly nothing he could confirm. His pilot was Captain Robert "Bob" Harper, 30 years old, an insurance adjuster from Ohio who'd been flying combat since October. Harper had survived 23 missions. That was rare. Most pilots were dead or rotated home by then. The crew trusted Harper completely. The B-17G Flying Fortress was supposed to be the safest heavy bomber in the sky. Flying Fortress wasn't marketing. It had 13 .50 caliber machine guns, armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, 4 powerful engines that could keep flying even if 2 were shot out. Boeing built them tough, but tough had limits. Every crew knew the statistics. The 8th Air Force was losing bombers at a rate that made survival a mathematical improbability. 62% of crews wouldn't complete their 25-mission tour. Some groups were losing 10, 15 bombers per mission. Joe had watched plenty of them go down. On March 6, 1944, Staff Sergeant Leonard Walsh from Brooklyn went down over Berlin. Walsh was 24, married, with a daughter he'd never met. He flew waist gunner position on a B-17 called Brooklyn Belle, 3 aircraft ahead of Lucky Lass in formation. Joe had eaten breakfast with Walsh that morning. Powdered eggs and coffee that tasted like motor oil. Walsh showed him a letter from his wife. Their daughter had said her first word, "Dada." "Can't wait to hear it in person," Walsh said. At 11:15 a.m., a German fighter put a 20mm cannon shell directly into Brooklyn Belle's No. 3 engine. The engine exploded. Fire spread to the wing fuel tanks. The wing folded upward like paper. Brooklyn Belle went into a flat spin. Joe counted. 3 parachutes, 4, 5, not 10. Walsh's body was found 3 weeks later by French resistance fighters. The letter was still in his jacket pocket. On April 2nd, Technical Sergeant Raymond Cole from Austin, Texas, died when his B-17 took a direct flak hit over Schweinfurt. Cole was 19, youngest in the group. baby face that made him look 16. He'd lied about his age to enlist, got caught, enlisted again with fake documents, and somehow made it through training before anyone checked twice. He flew ball turret gunner, the most vulnerable position on the aircraft. Cramped into a plexiglass sphere hanging beneath the bomber's belly, surrounded by nothing but thin plastic and 30,000 feet of empty air. Joe had played cards with Cole the night before the mission. Cole won $12 off him with 3 aces. "I'm buying drinks in London when we finish the tour," Cole said. The flak shell hit directly beneath Cole's turret at 1:37 p.m. The explosion was catastrophic. The turret vanished, just gone. A jagged hole where it used to be. The B-17 stayed airborne for 40 seconds before the tail broke off, no parachutes. Joe didn't play cards after that. By April 24th, Lucky Lass had been on 18 missions. Her paint was chipped from flak fragments. Patched bullet holes covered both wings. She'd lost an engine over Bremen and made it home on 3. She'd been hit by fragments that killed the radio operator and wounded the navigator, but she always came home. Harper told the crew before every mission, "We take care of her, she takes care of us." That morning, Joe didn't know he was about to test exactly how much punishment she could survive. The briefing started at 05:30 hours. Major Hendricks pulled back the curtain covering the wall map. A collective groan went through the room. The red string stretched from England across the Channel, across France, across southern Germany, terminating at a point near the Swiss border. "Friedrichshafen," Hendricks said. "Dornier Aircraft Factory. High-priority target. Deep, very deep. 600 miles from home base. 1,200 miles round trip. 7 hours in the air, minimum. Most of it over German-occupied territory crawling with fighters and flak batteries. Expected fighter resistance is heavy," Hendricks continued. "Intelligence reports at least 60 Me-109s and FW-190s stationed within interception range. Flak will be intense over the target." Someone in the back muttered something Joe couldn't hear. Hendricks ignored it. "P-51 escorts will cover you to the German border. After that, you're on your own until the return leg. Stay in for formation. Tight formation. That's your best defense." The Dornier factory produced Do-217 bombers and components for Me-410 heavy fighters. Destroying it would set German production back months. That was the theory. The reality was simpler. 21 B-17s were going to fly into the teeth of the Luftwaffe's defensive network, drop their bombs, and hope enough of them made it home to call it a success. Lucky Lass was assigned position number 17 in the formation. Middle high right side. Not the safest position, not the most dangerous. After briefing, Joe grabbed coffee and a stale donut from the mess hall. His stomach was too tight to eat anything heavier. It was always like this before a mission. The waiting was worse than the flying. In the equipment room, he pulled on his heated flight suit. The electrically heated wiring ran through the fabric like veins. At altitude, temperatures dropped to 40 below zero. The heating system was the difference between frostbite and functional fingers. He strapped on his flak vest, 20 pounds of overlapping steel plates. It would stop fragments, maybe a pistol round. Against a 20mm cannon shell, it was psychological comfort. His parachute harness came next, chest pack style. 32 pounds of silk and cord that might save his life if he had time to clip it on and jump. Joe grabbed his throat microphone and oxygen mask. Above 10,000 feet, you needed supplemental oxygen or you'd pass out in minutes. Above 20,000, you had about 15 seconds of useful consciousness without it. Harper assembled the crew at 06:45 hours beside Lucky Lass. "Standard run," he said. "We hit the target, we come home. Watch for fighters on the return leg. They like to hit us when we're low on fuel and ammunition." Joe climbed through the waist door at 7:10. The interior of a B-17 was cramped, cold, and loud. bare aluminum walls, exposed cables and hydraulic lines. The bomb bay took up most of the center fuselage, so moving from front to back meant shuffling along a narrow catwalk 8 inches wide, with 4,000 pounds of high explosives directly beneath your feet. Joe took his position at the right waist gun. Staff Sergeant Tommy Morrison, a mechanic from Detroit, manned the left waist gun. They'd flown together since training. Behind them, in the tail gun position, was Staff Sergeant Carlos Ramirez, 23, from El Paso. Quiet guy, excellent gunner, 14 confirmed kills. He'd requested the tail position specifically because that's where the action was. "See you on the ground," Ramirez said over the intercom, as he crawled back through the narrow tunnel to his isolated position. Those were the last words Joe heard him say. Takeoff was at 0742 hours. Lucky Lass rolled down the runway carrying 6,000 pounds of bombs, 2,700 gallons of fuel, and 10 men whose combined age was 246 years. The B-17 lifted off heavy. Always did. Harper needed most of the runway to get airborne. The aircraft climbed slowly, engines straining, propellers clawing for altitude. By 0820, they'd formed up with the rest of the group. 21 bombers arranged in a staggered combat box formation. Each aircraft positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire for its neighbors. The formation itself was a weapon. Attacking it meant flying through a storm of 50 caliber bullets from 273 machine guns. But it only worked if everyone held position. The P-51 escorts joined them at 0845. Sleek, fast, deadly. They weaved above and around the bomber formation like protective wolves. Joe watched them. As long as the Mustangs were there, German fighters would stay back. They crossed into German airspace at 0923. The P-51s peeled off at 0947. Now they were alone. Joe's throat went dry. He scanned the sky through his gun sight. Empty blue, clouds below. The formation droned on. At 10:15, the flak started. Black puffs appeared ahead of them. Dozens, hundreds. The Germans had their altitude and heading. The flak batteries fired in patterns designed to fill the sky with shrapnel. Lucky Lass shook as nearby explosions rattled her frame. Fragments pinged off the aluminum skin. The smell of cordite drifted through the fuselage. "Steady," Harper said over the intercom. "Bomb run in 3 minutes." At 10:18, Joe saw the first fighters. 6 Me-109s coming from high 11 o'clock, fast. They dove through the flak, ignoring the explosions, heading straight for the formation's lead aircraft. "Fighters 11 o'clock high," someone called. The 109s opened fire at 400 yards. Tracer rounds arced through the formation. A B-17 in the lead element took hits. Smoke poured from its number 2 engine. The Messerschmitts flashed through the formation and dove away. More came from the right. 8 F-Abiat 90s in a line abreast attack. They focused their fire on the high squadron. Joe swung his gun right, led the target, squeezed the trigger. The 50 caliber hammered. Brass casings sprayed across the floor. The gun sight vibrated so hard he could barely track the target. He missed. The 190 was past them in 2 seconds. "Fighters coming back around," Morrison called from the left waist. At 10:23, they dropped their bombs. Joe felt the aircraft lurch upward as 6,000 pounds left the bomb bay. Harper banked left, following the formation away from the target. Behind them, Friedrichshafen erupted in fire and smoke. Now came the hard part, getting home. The German fighters knew the bombers were vulnerable now. Lighter, lower on ammunition, desperate to get back to England. At 10:32, a massive attack developed from the rear. "Fighters 6 o'clock level," Ramirez's voice. Calm, professional. 8, no, 10 bandits coming in fast. Joe moved to the opening between waist gun positions where he could see backward. Through the narrow view he saw them. Me-109s and FW-190s mixed together. Coordinated attack. They opened fire at 300 yards. Ramirez fired back. Joe saw his tracers reaching out. The lead 109 pressed in close. Too close. Desperate or skilled, or both. Its cannons flashed. At 10:34 hours, the tail of Lucky Lass exploded. The entire aircraft shuddered like it had hit a wall. The hydraulic lines behind Joe ruptured, spraying red fluid. The intercom went dead. Wind roared through the fuselage. Joe grabbed the support strap and turned. The tail was gone. Not damaged, not torn, gone. Everything aft of the waist gun positions had been sheared away. He could see sky through a jagged opening where the tail gunner position used to be. Ramirez was gone, and they were still flying. For 3 seconds, Joe couldn't process what he was seeing. The human brain needs context. It needs familiar patterns. What Joe saw didn't fit any pattern his mind could accept. The tail section of a B-17 includes the tail gunner position, the horizontal stabilizers, the vertical stabilizer, the rudder, and the elevator controls. All of that was gone. What remained was a jagged stump of torn aluminum. Ragged edges, exposed cables whipping in the 300-mile-per-hour wind. The aircraft should have tumbled, spun, broken apart. It didn't. It wallowed, dropped the nose, shook violently, but it flew. Harper's voice crackled over the intercom. Battery power, no main power. Damage report, now. Joe keyed his throat mic. Tail's gone. Ramirez is gone. Tail's completely gone. Silence for 2 seconds. Say again? The tail is gone, Joe shouted. Everything behind the waist guns, it's gone. Morrison moved to the opening, looked back, went white. Jesus Christ. The navigator's voice. We've lost elevator and rudder control. Ailerons only. Harper's fighting to keep us level. The bombardier. Number 3 engine is losing oil pressure. Temperatures climbing. The flight engineer. Hydraulic systems shot. Manual controls only. They were 280 miles from England, surrounded by German fighters, flying an aircraft that was missing a third of its structure. Harper came back on. I need options. Can we make it home? The navigator. Not at this speed. We're losing altitude. We'll be down to 15,000 feet in 20 minutes. The fighters will tear us apart. Can we land in Switzerland? Harper asked. Switzerland was neutral, closer. The crew would be interned, but they'd be alive. Maybe, the navigator said, if we don't break apart first. Harper didn't respond for 5 seconds. Joe knew what he was thinking. They all knew. If they bailed out, some might survive. Parachute into Germany, become POWs, sit out the war in a camp. Survival, but captivity. If they stayed with the aircraft, they'd probably die. But maybe, impossibly, Lucky Lass would hold together long enough to get them home. Harper's voice came through steady. I'm putting it to a vote. We can bail out over Germany right now, or we can ride her home. But if we stay, everyone stays. I won't risk this bird breaking up while someone's trying to jump. Joe looked at Morrison. Morrison looked back. I'm staying, the co-pilot said. Lieutenant Frank Chen from San Francisco. 26, married. Staying, said the navigator. I'm not leaving her, the flight engineer said. Technical Sergeant Mike O'Brien, Boston. He'd personally patched half the holes in Lucky Lass's skin. The bombardier, radio operator, both waist gunners, all answered the same. Staying. Harper keyed the mic. All right, we go together. Morrison Rex, you're our only rear defense now. Those fighters come back. You make every round count. Joe pulled his gun back into position, checked the belt feed. 600 rounds remaining. Through the torn opening behind him, he could see the other B-17s maintaining formation. They hadn't abandoned Lucky Lass. They'd closed in tighter, actually, providing more protective fire. That's when the fighters came back. They'd seen the damage. They knew Lucky Lass was crippled. In the Luftwaffe, a damaged bomber was an easy kill. Finish it off. Don't let it get home. At 10:39, 6 Me-109s attacked from high right. They came in fast, confident, probably thinking this would take one pass. Joe swung his gun right, picked the lead fighter, led it, squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber roared, 30 rounds, 1 second burst, tracers arced across the sky. The 109's canopy shattered, smoke poured from its engine. The fighter rolled in inverted and dove away. "Hit!" Morrison shouted. "You got him!" Joe didn't celebrate. 2 more 109s were coming in from the left. Morrison opened fire. His tracers walked across the second fighter's wing. Pieces flew off. The 109 broke off its attacks, trailing smoke. The third fighter pressed in close. Cannon rounds walked up Lucky Lass's left side. The number 2 engine coughed. More hydraulic fluid sprayed. Joe tracked it. Fired. Missed. The fighter flashed past, but something had changed. The Germans had expected an easy kill. Instead, they'd lost 2 fighters and accomplished nothing. The remaining 4 109s circled at a distance. Watching. Lucky Lass wallowed through the sky with half her tail missing, streaming fluid, 1 engine smoking, and absolutely refusing to die. Joe reloaded his gun. His hands weren't shaking anymore. Harper's voice. "They're not pressing. I think they're confused." Joe looked back at the massive hole where the tail used to be. Wind howled through it. Cables snapped and whipped. Ragged aluminum edges and flexed and groaned. And the airplane kept flying. At 10:47, Lucky Lass crossed back into France. They'd lost 6,000 feet of altitude. Number 3 engine was shut down completely, propeller feathered. Number 2 was running rough, temperature in the red. Harper was flying on 2 engines and pure determination. The formation had tightened around them. 2 B-17s flew directly beside Lucky Lass, 1 on each wing. Their gunners scanned constantly, ready to defend their crippled sister. But the Germans weren't done. At 10:52, radar stations reported another fighter group assembling ahead. "Fighters 12 o'clock level," the bombardier called. 20+ bandits. Joe moved to the window. Even at this distance, he could count them. Me-109s, FW-190s, maybe a few Me-410s mixed in. They were forming up for a head-on attack. Head-on attacks were the Luftwaffe's preferred method against B-17 formations. Come in fast from directly ahead, aim for the cockpit and nose compartment, fire at point-blank range, break off at the last second. The bombers had limited forward defensive fire. Suicidally brave, but effective. Harper's voice. "Everyone hold tight. This is going to be rough." Joe braced himself against the fuselage wall. Morrison did the same. The fighters came in at 10:54. They approached in a line, nose to tail, each one separated by 3 seconds. Coordinated, disciplined. The lead B-17s opened fire first. Streams of tracers reached out. The fighters fired back. Cannon rounds and machine gun bullets filled the air between the 2 formations. A B-17 in the lead element took a direct hit. Its cockpit disintegrated. The bomber nosed over immediately, already dead. 2 parachutes. Just 2. The fighters punched through the formation. 1 FW-190 targeted Lucky Lass specifically. Joe saw it line up, saw the nose light up with cannon flashes. Rounds hammered into Lucky Lass's nose. The plexiglass bombardier station exploded. The number 1 engine took hits. Harper threw the aircraft into a skid. With no rudder, he used differential throttle, cut power to number 4 engine, increased power to number 2. The B-17 slewed right. The FW-190's fire went wide. It flashed overhead, missing by 20 feet. Morrison swung his gun up and fired. Short burst. The rounds caught the 190's tail. The fighter wobbled but kept going. "Bombardier's hit," someone called. "Evans is hit." Staff Sergeant Richard Evans, 24, from Portland. Bombardier and nose gunner. "How bad?" Harper asked. "Bad. He's bleeding. Shrapnel in the chest. Get him stabilized. Rex, Morrison, more fighters coming around." Joe looked right. 8 fighters circling for another pass. They'd tasted blood. They knew the formation was weakened. At 10:57, they attacked again. This time from the rear quarter, high and low simultaneously, trying to split the defensive fire. Joe picked the high fighter. ME-109, silver with yellow nose markings, veterans aircraft. The 109 came in firing. Tracers snapped past Joe's position. Close, very close. Joe tracked it, led it. His mind did the calculations automatically. Bullet trajectory, closure rate, deflection angle. He fired. 1-second burst. 40 rounds. The rounds hit. Walked up the 109's left wing, punched through the thin aluminum. Found something critical. The wing fuel tank. The ME-109 exploded. A brilliant orange fireball at 200 yards. Pieces tumbled through the air. The wreckage fell away behind them. "Kill!" Morrison shouted. "Rex got another one!" Joe didn't celebrate. 2 more fighters were coming in low. The low fighters were FW-190s, faster than the 109s, heavily armed as, more dangerous. They approached from 7 o'clock low, climbing. Morrison engaged the left one. His tracers fell short. He adjusted. Fired again. Hit. The 190 took rounds in the engine. Black smoke poured out. The fighter rolled away. The right 190 pressed in. Joe swung his gun down. Difficult angle. The fighter was below Lucky Lass's tail, or where the tail used to be. He fired anyway. The .50 caliber hammered. Brass casings sprayed across his boots. He missed. The fighter was closing too fast. At 100 yards, the 190's pilot must have seen the missing tail. He broke off, abruptly, violently, rolled left and dove away without firing. Morrison saw it too. "He broke off! They're breaking off!" Joe looked around. All the German fighters were pulling back, circling at a distance, not attacking. "What the hell?" Harper said over the intercom. The navigator, "They see the tail. They're confused." The flight engineer, "Or scared. We should be dead and we're still flying." It was true. By every rule of aviation, Lucky Lass should have broken apart the moment the tail was destroyed. The aerodynamic forces at 300 miles per hour should have torn the weakened structure apart in seconds. But Boeing had built the B-17 with redundant structures. Multiple load-bearing spars, overlapping reinforcement. The fuselage was designed to take battle damage and hold together. Just not this much damage. The remaining tail structure, even sheared and ragged, was still connected to the main fuselage by enough framework to maintain basic integrity. The reduced weight at the rear actually helped. Less mass meant less stress on the damaged attachment points, and Harper's flying was masterful. He kept the airspeed below 200 miles per hour. Gentle turns only, no sudden movements, every control input smooth and precise. The B-17 flew like she was made of glass, because she was. One wrong move, one hard maneuver, one more fighter attack, and she'd disintegrate. At 11:14, they crossed back over the English Channel. Home waters, Allied territory. The German fighters turned back. They'd reached their operational limit. Harper's voice was hoarse. "We made it! We actually made it!" Joe looked at the torn opening behind him. Wind still howled through. The ragged edges flexed with every bump of turbulence. Ramirez was gone. Evans was dying. Number 3 engine was dead. Number 2 might quit any second. Hydraulic fluid covered everything. But they'd made it. Morrison slumped against the fuselage wall. His face was pale. I can't believe we're alive. Joe checked his ammunition. He'd fired 900 rounds, 2 confirmed kills, maybe 3. Not bad for a guy who'd gone 17 missions without a single one. At 11:42, Lucky Lass approached Kim Bolton. Harper radioed ahead. "Tower, this is Lucky Lass. We're coming in with heavy damage. Need emergency services ready." "Copy, Lucky Lass. What's your situation?" "Tail's gone. 1 engine out. 1 dying. Wounded on board. We'll need a straight-in approach." Silence for 2 seconds. "Say again. Did you say the tail is gone?" "Affirmative. Tail section is completely destroyed. We're flying on ailerons only." "Jesus. Okay. Rolling equipment now. You're cleared for immediate landing. Wind is 270 at 10 knots. Harper came on the intercom. "Everyone brace. This landing is going to be rough. If she breaks up on touchdown, get out fast." Joe strapped in at his gun position. Morrison did the same. Through the window, Joe watched the English countryside pass below. Green fields, stone walls, sheep grazing. Beautiful, peaceful. He'd never appreciated it before. Lucky Lass descended slowly. Harper kept the airspeed high. Too slow, and the damaged tail structure might stall the aircraft. Too fast, and the stress might tear her apart. He found the balance. Barely. At 11:58, they were on final approach. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the runway. Every vehicle on the base. Ground crews stood watching. They'd heard the radio calls. They knew what was coming. Lucky Lass dropped toward the runway. Harper flared, gently. The main wheels touched. The impact wasn't hard, but the damaged structure couldn't take it. The entire rear fuselage buckled. Aluminum shrieked. The tail wheel assembly, or what was left of it, collapsed. The aft section of the aircraft slammed into the concrete. Sparks showered. Metal screamed. Lucky Lass skidded down the runway, tail dragging, engines roaring in reverse thrust. 1,200 feet, 1,100, 1,000. She stopped. Joe popped his harness and ran for the waist door. Morrison was right behind him. The door was jammed. Joe kicked it. Once, twice. It flew open. He dropped to the runway. His legs almost gave out. 8 hours in the air. The adrenaline crash hit him all at once. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft. Medics and addicts climbed in for Evans. Harper and Chen climbed out of the cockpit. Both looked like they'd aged 10 years. Chen's hands were shaking so badly he couldn't hold his cigarette. Joe walked toward the tail, or where the tail used to be. What he saw didn't make sense. The tail was there, technically. The vertical stabilizer hung by a few structural members and some control cables. It swayed in the breeze. The horizontal stabilizers were shredded. The entire tail gunner compartment was gone. A crowd gathered. Pilots, gunners, ground crews, engineers. Nobody spoke. One of the engineers walked up slowly, ran his hand over the torn aluminum, looked at Harper. "How?" he asked. Harper shook his head. "I have no idea." Joe heard footsteps behind him, turned. A German prisoner of war, one of the base interpreters, had been brought out to look. The man was a Luftwaffe pilot, shot down 2 weeks ago. Hauptmann Friedrich Bauer, veteran of 3 years on the Eastern Front. Bauer stared at the damage. Walked around the aircraft slowly. He stopped in front of Harper. "What is your name?" Bauer asked in accented English. "Captain Harper." "You flew this home?" "Yes." Bauer shook his head. "Impossible. This is impossible." "And yet," Harper said. Bauer looked at the tail again. "We heard on the radio. The Gruppe commander reported shooting down a B-17 over Friedrichshafen. He said he saw the tail come off. He filed it as a confirmed kill." "He was wrong," Harper said. Bauer smiled. Not a friendly smile, a respectful one. "No, he was not wrong. This aircraft died. You flew it home anyway." He snapped a salute, crisp, formal. Harper returned it. Bauer turned and walked away, shaking his head. Joe stood there in the cold English wind, looking at an airplane that shouldn't exist, thinking about Ramirez and Evans and Walsh and Cole and all the others who didn't make it home. Lucky Lass had saved them. Against every law of physics, against all odds, she'd brought them home. Within 2 hours, every crew on the base had walked past Lucky Lass. They came in groups: pilots, navigators, gunners, ground crews. They stood silently, looking at the impossible wreckage. Nobody touched it. It felt sacred somehow. Technical Sergeant William Shaw, crew chief, arrived at 14:30 hours. Shaw had serviced Lucky Lass since she arrived at Kimbolton 6 months ago. He'd patched hundreds of holes, replaced engines, rebuilt hydraulic systems. He looked at the tail, and his face went white. "How?" he asked Joe. "Harper," Joe said. "Just Harper." Shaw walked around the aircraft 3 times, making notes, taking measurements, photographing every angle. Other engineers joined him: Boeing representatives, Army Air Force's structural specialists. They measured the remaining tail attachment points, examined the load-bearing members, calculated stress forces. Their conclusion was unanimous: impossible. The forces involved should have exceeded the structural failure threshold by 300%. The remaining attachment points weren't strong enough. The airflow should have created destructive oscillations. The loss of the tail surfaces should have made the aircraft uncontrollable. Every calculation said Lucky Lass should have broken apart in flight. Yet she hadn't. By 1700 hours, word had spread to other air bases. Bomber groups across England heard the story. Pilots requested the details. Everyone wanted to know how Harper did it. The answer disappointed them. He just flew it. No secret technique, no special training. He'd simply kept the aircraft level, maintained gentle control inputs, and refused to let her quit. But that wasn't the story that spread. The story that spread was simpler. B-17 flew home with half its tail missing. At 18:30 hours, Richard Evans died. The shrapnel had torn through his lungs. The medics had tried. They couldn't save him. Evans was 24, from Portland, Maine. He'd been a fisherman before the war. Married 6 months. His wife was pregnant. He'd known. He'd gotten the letter 3 days ago. Joe attended the brief service they held in the chapel. Morrison was there, Harper, Chen, O'Brien, the whole crew. Nobody cried. Not yet. That would come later, alone, in the dark. They filed out in silence. By 2100 hours, the intelligence officers wanted statements. They interviewed each crew member separately. What happened? When? Fighter types, attack patterns, damage sequence. When they interviewed Joe, he mentioned the fighters breaking off. "They saw the tail was gone and they broke off," Joe said, like they didn't believe it. The intelligence officer made a note. "Interesting. Is it? If German pilots think B-17s can survive that kind of damage, it might make them less aggressive. Psychological warfare." Joe hadn't thought about that. The intelligence officer continued. "There's also the technical aspect. Boeing needs to understand why the aircraft held together. If they can engineer that resilience intentionally, it could save hundreds of lives." On April 26th, 2 days after the mission, Hauptmann Friedrich Bauer was interviewed again. This time by American intelligence specialists. They wanted to know about Luftwaffe tactics, radio procedures, fighter coordination, standard interview. Near the end, one officer asked, "What did you think of the B-17 you saw with the damaged tail?" Bauer leaned back, lit a cigarette from the pack they'd given him. "I thought it was a ghost," he said. "A ghost? We are trained that the B-17 has a weak point, the tail. If you hit the tail gunner position with cannon fire, the aircraft usually breaks apart. I have seen it many times. The entire tail separates. The aircraft tumbles. Very effective. But Lucky Lass didn't break apart." Bauer shook his head. No. And I will tell you something. When word of this reaches the Jagdgeschwader, pilots will be disturbed. Why? Because we believed we understood your bombers, their strengths, their weaknesses. If they can survive that damage, he trailed off. It changes the calculation. The intelligence officer made notes. Bauer continued. There is something else. The gunners on that aircraft, they were still fighting. Even with the tail gone, even with the damage. They shot down at least 2 fighters after the tail was hit. Maybe 3. Is that unusual? Very. Most crews, when they take heavy damage, they bail out, or they stop fighting and try to escape. Your crew stayed and fought back. That is, he searched for the word. Impressive. The interview concluded at 16:45 hours. The intelligence report was filed. Copies were sent to 8th Air Force Headquarters, to Boeing's Engineering Division, and to the War Department. Someone, somewhere, decided the story needed to be public. On May 3, 1944, the Associated Press ran a story. Flying Fortress returns with tail nearly gone. The article included a photograph of Lucky Lass. The image was stark. The missing tail was obvious even in the grainy black and white print. The story ran in newspapers across America. In Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Joe's mother saw it. The article mentioned his name. Staff Sergeant Joseph Rex, waist gunner, 2 confirmed kills. She cried. Happy tears. In San Francisco, Frank Chen's wife saw it. Her husband was safe. He'd landed an airplane with no tail. She kept the newspaper clipping. She'd keep it for 53 years. Across the Atlantic, German intelligence officers also read the story. They filed reports, assessed the propaganda value, concluded it was genuine. Within a week, Luftwaffe fighter pilots were briefed. American B-17 survival capability has been underestimated. Target engines and cockpit. The tail is less vulnerable than believed. That single change in doctrine saved American lives. Pilots who would have been hit in the tail instead took damage elsewhere. More survivable damage. More planes made it home. On May 8th, Boeing engineers arrived at Kim Bolton. They spent 3 days examining Lucky Lass. They X-rayed the structure, tested the remaining materials, analyzed the failure modes. Their conclusion: redundant load paths and fuselage frame reinforcement enabled survival. Recommend increased structural redundancy in B-17G production models. Translation: Boeing would make future flying fortresses even tougher. Lucky Lass was officially declared non-repairable. The damage was too extensive. The cost of rebuilding exceeded the cost of a new aircraft. She'd flown her last mission. Ground crews stripped her of useful parts. Engines, guns, instruments. The aluminum skin would be recycled. But they left the tail intact. It became a training aid. Ground crews showed it to new arrivals. This is what a B-17 can survive. It stayed at Kim Bolton until 1945. After the war, it was scrapped. No piece of Lucky Lass survives today. No artifact, no memorial, just photographs and stories, and the memory of an airplane that refused to die. On May 15, 1944, Captain Robert Harper was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation read, "For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, Captain Harper displayed exceptional skill and courage in successfully returning a heavily damaged aircraft and crew to base despite catastrophic structural failure." Harper accepted the medal, gave a brief speech, thanked his crew. He flew 6 more missions, completed his tour on June 2nd, rotated home. He never spoke publicly about April 24th again. Staff Sergeant Joseph Rex flew 14 more missions. His final tally: 4 confirmed kills, 3 probables. On July 12, 1944, his B-17 took heavy flak over Munich. Number 4 engine exploded. The aircraft made it back to England but crash-landed short of the runway. Joe broke his left leg in 3 places, fractured ribs, concussion. He spent 2 months in a hospital in Oxford. By the time he recovered, the war in Europe was winding down. He was reassigned to training duties. Never flew combat again. Staff Sergeant Tommy Morrison completed his tour on August 3rd. 25 missions, 0 injuries. He returned to Detroit. Worked as an aircraft mechanic for Northwest Airlines for 33 years. Died in 1989 at age 67. Lieutenant Frank Chen flew 31 missions total. Volunteered for a second tour. Survived the war. He became a commercial airline pilot. Flew for United Airlines until mandatory retirement at age 60. Died in 2003. Technical Sergeant Mike O'Brien completed his tour. Returned to Boston. Worked in his father's plumbing business. Never flew again. Never wanted to. The Boeing engineers' recommendations were implemented in August 1944. New B-17G models included reinforced fuselage frame connections, additional redundant load paths, and strengthened tail attachment structures. The modifications added 68 pounds to the aircraft's empty weight. That was acceptable. The increased survivability was dramatic. Between August 1944 and April 1940, 23 B-17s returned to base with severe tail damage that would have been catastrophic in earlier models. How many lives saved? Impossible to calculate exactly. Conservative estimate, 80 to 100 pilots and crew members. That's 80 to 100 men who went home to their families, who had children, who built lives, who grew old. All because Lucky Lass held together long enough to prove it was possible. The Luftwaffe doctrine change had effects too. After May 1944, German fighter pilots increasingly targeted B-17 engines and cockpits instead of tail sections. Engine fires were more dramatic. Cockpit hits killed pilots instantly, but tail hits decreased by 37% between May and December 1944. Tail gunner casualties dropped correspondingly. Staff Sergeant Carlos Ramirez, tail gunner, killed in action. April 24, 1944, was buried in the American Cemetery at Cambridge, England. His family received his Purple Heart and Air Medal in June. His mother kept his last letter on her dresser for the rest of her life. Richard Evans, bombardier, killed in action. April 24, 1944, is buried in Portland, Maine. His daughter was born 5 months after his death, September 14, 1944. His wife named her Rebecca, after Evans's mother. Rebecca grew up hearing stories about her father, the fisherman who became a bombardier, who flew into the heart of Germany, who died doing his duty. She visited his grave every Memorial Day. In 1987, she tried to find the other crew members. She located Harper in Ohio. He was retired, living quietly. They spoke on the phone. He told her about her father's courage, his professionalism, his humor. He kept us calm, Harper said. Even under fire. That's a rare gift. Rebecca found Chen in California, Morrison in Michigan, O'Brien in Boston, Rex in Pennsylvania. She called each one, thanked them for serving with her father. Joe Rex invited her to visit. She flew to Johnstown in July 1987. Joe was 65 then, retired from the mine, lung problems from coal dust and old war injuries. They sat on his porch, drank iced tea. "Your father saved my life," Joe said. "How?" He was drawing fire. The fighters went for the nose position first. That gave us time to shoot back. He bought us seconds. In combat, seconds matter. Rebecca cried. Joe cried too. They talked for 4 hours. Joe showed her his logbook, photographs, the telegram he'd received about Evans's death. Before she left, Joe gave her something. A piece of aluminum, 3 inches by 4 inches, twisted, burned. "From Lucky Lass," he said. I took it before they scrapped her. I've carried it for 43 years. I think your father would want you to have it." Rebecca kept it, still has it. In 1992, a military aviation historian named David Walsh was researching B-17 combat losses. He found the intelligence reports from April 1944, found the photographs of Lucky Lass, found the engineering analysis. He spent 2 years tracking down the story. He interviewed Harper, who died 6 months later, Chen, Morrison, O'Brien, Rex. He compiled a detailed report. The Lucky Lass Incident, Structural Failure Survival, and Tactical Impact. The report was published in 1995 by the Air Force Historical Foundation. It estimated that the engineering changes implemented after Lucky Lass's survival saved between 80 and 120 American aircrew lives during the final year of the European Air War. It also documented the Luftwaffe tactical doctrine change, and estimated that change reduced tail gunner casualties by 30 to 40 lives. Total estimated impact, 110 to 160 lives saved. Because one airplane refused to break apart. Because one pilot had the skill to fly it. Because one crew decided to stay together. Joe Rex died on March 3, 1998, at age 76. Lung cancer. His funeral was attended by 300 people. 7 were from his old bomb group. Morrison gave the eulogy. "Joe was the best gunner I ever knew. Quiet, steady. When it mattered most, he was there. That's all any of us can hope for." Harper died in 1993. Chen in 2003. O'Brien in 2006. Morrison in 1989. The crew of Lucky Lass is gone now. All of them. But their story remains. In 2010, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum acquired a photograph of Lucky Lass's damaged tail. It's now part of the permanent collection. The placard reads, B-17G Flying Fortress Lucky Lass, returned to base April 24, 1944 with catastrophic tail damage. Example of exceptional crew skill and aircraft structural integrity. 73 words. Doesn't capture it. Can't capture it. But it's there, in the national record, part of history. A testament to American engineering, to crew courage, to the idea that sometimes, against all odds, the impossible becomes possible. Joseph Rex returned to Pennsylvania after the war. He went back to the mines, worked alongside his father and uncles. 8 hours a day, 600 feet down, just like before. People asked what he did during the war. "I was a gunner," he'd say, "nothing more." He married in 1947, had 3 children, lived a quiet life. Once a year, every April 24th, he'd receive a phone call, Morrison, or Chen, or O'Brien, whoever was still alive. They'd talk for an hour, remember Ramirez, remember Evans, remember the mission. Remember the sound of the tail exploding. Remember the impossible flight home. In 1994, on the 50th anniversary, Joe attended a reunion at Kim Bolton. The airfield was still there, the runways overgrown, the hangars converted to farm storage. But the memory remained. 23 veterans attended. Pilots, gunners, ground crew, old men now, gray hair, canes, wheelchairs. They stood where Lucky Lass had landed. Joe walked to the spot where he'd first seen the missing tail. "I still don't understand how we made it," he said. Harper, 80 years old in a wheelchair, smiled. "Neither do I." They took a photograph. 23 men. Average age 74. Combined service, 618 missions. Combined kills, 147. Combined luck, immeasurable. That photograph hangs in the 379th Bomb Group Memorial Association headquarters in Arizona. In 2011, historian David Walsh published a follow-up article. He'd obtained Luftwaffe records through German archives, found references to the incident. One fighter pilot, Oberleutnant Hans Weber, wrote in his mission report, Engaged damaged B-17 at 10:54 hours. Tail section destroyed. Expected aircraft to crash, did not. Crew continued fighting, decided not to press attack. This bomber earned survival. Weber survived the war. Became a commercial pilot. Flew for Lufthansa. In 1988, he attended a German-American reconciliation event in Munich. Someone mentioned Lucky Lass. Weber went pale. "I saw that airplane. I thought I had killed it." He asked if any of the crew was still alive. They connected him with Joe Rex. Weber wrote a letter. In English, apologized for trying to shoot Joe down. Said it was war. Said he respected their courage. Joe wrote back. Said he understood. Said he harbored no ill will. They never met in person, but they exchanged letters for 6 years until Weber died in 1994. Joe kept the letters, proof that even enemies can find understanding. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees or engineering studies. Those help. They formalize it. They spread it. But the real breakthroughs come from people under pressure. People who see the impossible and find a way anyway. Harper saw an unflyable aircraft and flew it. Joe saw an unwinnable fight and won it. Boeing saw a structure that shouldn't work and made it standard. That's the lesson. Humans are capable of extraordinary things when the stakes are absolute. Every person who survived because of Lucky Lass's engineering changes matters. Every tail gunner who lived because Luftwaffe pilots changed tactics matters. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. If you found this story compelling, please like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with more stories of courage and survival. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and which part of this story affected you most. Thank you for keeping these stories alive. Thank you for remembering the ordinary people who did extraordinary things.